The only legacy you're building is a lesson in failure. My brother's toast hung in the brunch air, a public verdict delivered over imported sparkling wine. His eyes weren't on me. They were fixed on my 12-year-old daughter, Ava, making sure the lesson landed on the most vulnerable target in our family. Your mother doesn't build. She advises. At 40, she owns nothing tangible. Don't repeat that mistake. Ava's fork stilled. The ambient clatter of the upscale patio faded into a ringing silence. Around us, his investor friends offered sympathetic, patronizing smiles. I didn't correct him. I didn't defend. I simply watched the ice melt in my glass, each droplet a passing second on an invisible clock. It was 11:38 a.m. In 22 minutes, the entire narrative he'd constructed, of himself as the self-made patriarch, of me as the wandering sibling, would shatter. I placed my napkin down with a precision that felt like arming a weapon. This wasn't a retreat. It was a silent declaration of war, witnessed only by the daughter whose future I refused to let him define. Running from the truth, Elise? His voice pursued us as we walked away, smooth and booming for his audience. We haven't even discussed the trust fund for Ava. Don't you want security for her? I didn't turn. I held Ava's hand, my grip firm and steady, a silent counterpoint to the tremor in her fingers. We moved past the uniformed valets who scrambled for his keys, past the low-slung, rumbling sports cars that were his chorus of validation. The heat of the parking lot asphalt rose in visible waves, distorting the world behind us. In the cocoon of my car, a sensible hybrid sedan bought outright, the atmosphere changed. The humiliation crystallized into something far more useful: resolve. Mom. Ava's voice was a fragile thing in the quiet. Is Uncle Marcus right? Are we just pretending? I turned in my seat, meeting her eyes that held the same sea glass green as our mother's. I saw the blueprint of a limiting belief being drafted in her mind, a design for a smaller life. Listen to me, I said, my voice low but diamond clear. Your uncle confuses volume for value. He thinks the loudest narrative is the truest one. It's not. The most powerful foundations are poured in silence. I started the car, but before pulling out, I did two things. First, I reached over and squeezed her hand. You are not a consequence of my choices. You are my inspiration for them. Second, I took my phone from my bag. The screen, shielded from the sun, showed a single, encrypted app. I typed a 3-word command to a number not saved in my contacts: execute sunset protocol. The response was almost instantaneous. Asterisk acknowledged. Assets in position. Asterisk. That was it. No questions. My head of security, a man named Kaito who existed in the shadows of legal firewalls, knew what it meant. The 3-year grace period was over. The silent partner was terminating the arrangement. People often wonder how he didn't know. How could Marcus, a man who boasted of reading every line of a prospectus, not see that the anonymous benefactor who had saved his flagship venture 3 years ago was his younger sister? The answer is a perceptual flaw in his character. He worshipped at the altar of visible spectacle. To him, power had to wear a tailored suit and a loud watch. It had to command a room and drop names. The concept of influence that worked through discrete shell corporations, silent equity, and encrypted directives was as invisible to him as AirPoint 3 years ago. His empire, a chain of boutique fitness studios predicated on viral trends, was collapsing under debt and terrible leases. He'd called me, not for a business solution, but for a familial bailout. I need a loan, Elise. Just to tide me over. You've got some savings, right? I did not give him a loan. I created Sycamore Ventures. Through it, I bought his company's staggering debt for 30 cents on the dollar. I then injected capital for a controlling 62% equity stake. He spent the subsequent years sending quarterly reports to a P.O. box, trying to impress a board of directors he imagined as stern financiers in New York, never once connecting it to the sister he described at that very brunch as artistically inclined but financially adrift. "Where are we going now?" Ava asked, watching the cityscape shift as I drove toward the quieter, tree-lined streets near the old river district. "To the observatory," I said. "And then, you have a front-row seat to a corporate reshuffling." It was 11:52 a.m. Marcus was likely ordering a second bottle, holding court, basking in the social credit of his perceived generosity for even inviting us. The notion that he was, at that very moment, a minority shareholder, an employee in all but his own awareness, would have seemed like science fiction to him. The hillside observatory was mostly deserted on a weekday. I bought 2 tickets and we walked to the western terrace, which overlooked the city's financial district. The glass towers glittered, a forest of ambition and ego. I pointed to the one that housed his company, a needle of blue glass. "See that building, Ava? Most people look at it and see a fortress. They see impenetrable strength." She nodded, squinting against the sun. "But it's not," I said. "It's a structure. And every structure has a foundation, plumbing, electrical conduits, a deed of ownership. The person who controls those things controls the fortress, no matter whose name is on the door. Your uncle has been polishing the door handle for 3 years, thinking it makes him the owner. Today, we're changing the locks." My phone vibrated. Not a message, but an automated alert from my asset management platform. The quarterly property tax for our family's coastal home had just been paid. From my account, as it had been for the past 7 years. Another financial thread he took for granted, another pillar of his assumed legacy that was, in truth, held upright by my silent support. I let out a long, slow breath. The 3-year experiment in mercy was concluded. I had provided capital, infrastructure, and time, hoping the pressure of real stewardship would forge a humbler, wiser leader. The data was now irrefutable. He had used the runway not for takeoff, but for a vanity show. My silence had not been seen as strategic depth. It had been interpreted as blank space, to be filled with his own commentary. We left the calm of the observatory. It was time to reclaim the narrative of my home office. It was a sunlit room in our rented house, its walls lined not with expensive art, but with whiteboards cascading in market maps, acquisition timelines, and algorithmic models. To Marcus, my consulting meant giving advice. In this room, it meant directing the flow of capital. "This is where you work?" Ava asked, her curiosity cutting through her lingering anxiety. She traced a finger over a complex web of lines connecting companies on a sector map. "This is where I build," I corrected gently, powering on my desktop. "Advice is just talk. What happens in this room moves money, changes ownership, creates and dissolves fortunes." I pulled up the dashboard for Sycamore Ventures. The numbers were a symphony of quiet success, a net asset value of $24.7 million, a diversified portfolio of 12 companies, each one a controlling stake acquired through the same method, finding distressed value others missed, buying debt, and restructuring with surgical precision. Marcus's chain of studios, Apex Vitality, was listed there, its metrics glowing a soft, problematic amber. Revenue was flat. Member retention was down. His personal expense draws were flagged in red, having increased 42% year-over-year. Ava peered at the screen. "That's Uncle Marcus's company logo." "It is," I said. "And this screen shows he's been treating the company bank account like a personal trophy fund. Every luxury car lease, every 5-star business dinner with friends, every membership at that club. It's all here, categorized as business development. He's been selling a story of success while the underlying business slowly starves." I opened a new tab, showing the legal architecture. The Aurora Clause wasn't a dramatic piece of revenge, it was a standard failsafe I'd insisted on. It stipulated that upon verified evidence of material misrepresentation or fiduciary negligence, the silent majority shareholder could call an immediate, binding shareholder vote to reassign operational control. The evidence was now a compiled digital file, expense reports, comparative market analyses showing Apex's decline against competitors, even social media posts where he'd tagged his executive lifestyle from company-funded retreats. The call I'd triggered would legally convene the board at 3 p.m. There was no scenario where he retained his CEO title. My phone rang, shattering the focused silence. The caller ID flashed Marcus. A relic of a time when I still hoped for camaraderie. Ava looked at me, her eyes wide. "It's okay," I said. "This is part of the data collection." I let it go to voicemail. The old me, the peacekeeper, would have deleted it unheard, a way to preserve the fragile family fiction. The new me, the majority shareholder, needed it on record. "Put your headphones on for a minute, sweetheart," I said. She obeyed, the world of her music giving her a safe bubble. I pressed play on the voicemail, speaker on so I could also record it. "Elise." His voice was a mix of irritation and performative disappointment. "That little walkout stunt? Incredibly childish. You embarrassed yourself and undermined me in front of crucial partners. This has consequences. Consider your access to the beach house revoked this summer. Maybe the time alone will help you reflect on your instability. You want to play the impoverished artist? Fine. Live the part. But don't drag Ava into your narrative of victimhood." The message ended. The beach house. The property our parents left to both of us, which I had exclusively maintained for a decade, paying the mortgages, the insurance, the repairs while he used it as a backdrop for his curated life. His threat was to ban me from my own property, an asset he contributed nothing to. The arrogance was so profound it circled back to being a perfect diagnostic tool. I saved the audio file. I attached it to the evidence dossier with a note, *Exhibit A, hostile intent and demonstrated failure to recognize shared asset boundaries. Forward to all board members pre-meeting. Ava took her headphones off. "Was he angry?" "He was predictable," I said, standing up. "And in business, predictability is a weakness." "Time to get dressed." "For what?" "For the board meeting." "You're coming." "I am." Her voice held a mix of dread and intrigue. "Yes. You need to see how the structures we talk about get enforced in reality." "How words on a screen," I said, tapping the dashboard showing the legal clause, "translate into actions in a room." I changed into a suit, a sleek, navy piece that was armor and uniform. I helped Ava into a simple, elegant dress. We were not dressing for his world of flashy brands. We were dressing for the world of consequences, which demanded a different kind of authority. As we drove downtown, the city seemed to sharpen into focus. Every building was a ledger of decisions, every person a story of choices. Marcus had chosen his story, the charismatic founder, the generous brother, the king of his castle. He had written my part as the supporting character in his drama. Today, I was rewriting the script. Not with a loud confrontation, but with the silent, undeniable weight of ownership. He believed he was the playwright. At 3 p.m., he would learn he was merely an actor, and I held not only the stage but the theater, the rights, and the box office. The car descended into the underground parking of the Apex Vitality headquarters. We parked not in a visitor spot, but in a reserved space labeled SV1. Sycamore Ventures. Spot 1. "Remember, Ava," I said, turning off the engine. "Power isn't about who gives the most exciting speech. It's about who holds the most shares. Everything else is just noise." We stepped out of the car. The air was cool and still. Somewhere 40 floors above us, Marcus was likely rehearsing his magnanimous forgiveness for my brunch episode, completely unaware the ground had already shifted beneath his feet. The lobby was a temple to his brand. Polished concrete, giant screens showing slow-motion athletes, the scent of lemon and eucalyptus. The receptionist, a young man with a wired earpiece, gave a practiced, dismissive smile as we approached the desk. "I'm here for the 3 o'clock shareholder assembly," I said, my voice neutral. "Name and company?" he asked, eyes already drifting back to his monitor. Elise Soren. Sycamore Ventures. His fingers froze over the keyboard. His head snapped up, his gaze darting from my face to Ava and back to his screen. The color drained from his cheeks. The name of Sycamore Ventures on the access list clearly had a different weight than he'd anticipated, stammering a hushed message. Sir, your 3 o'clock is. Sycamore is here. In the lobby. A pause. Yes. She has a guest. Within 30 seconds, Kaito, my head of security, emerged from a private elevator bank. He was an imposing man who moved with unsettling quietness. He gave a single respectful nod to me and completely ignored the gaping receptionist. The board is assembling. They've been pre-briefed with the dossier. And Marcus, he believes you're coming to apologize for your behavior. He's in his office, preparing his remarks. We took the private elevator. As the floors flashed by, I knelt to Ava's level. What you're about to see is not a fight. It's a process. It's dry, it's legal, and it's final. When you own the majority, you don't need to yell. You just need to state the facts. The elevator opened directly into the boardroom antechamber. It was all cool grays and indirect lighting. 3 other people were already there, the 2 independent board members I had installed years ago, and the corporate secretary. They offered tight, professional smiles. The materials are distributed and acknowledged, the secretary said, handing me a tablet with digital signatures. Quorum is satisfied. We await the chair. The door to Marcus's office burst open. He strode out, radiating aggrieved authority, adjusting his cufflinks. Elise, this is highly irregular. Bringing a child into a... He stopped dead, seeing the assembled board, the secretary, the solemnity of the scene. His eyes landed on Kaito, standing silently by the window, and confusion flickered across his face. What is this? A pre-meeting. This is the meeting, Marcus, I said, walking past him into the boardroom. Shall we begin? The room was a stark contrast to the vibrant lobby, a long table of pale oak, ergonomic chairs, a single large screen. I took the seat at the head of the table. Not his usual seat, but the one reserved for the chair of the board. Ava sat in a chair along the wall, a notebook and pen I'd given her in hand. Marcus stood in the doorway, flustered. That's my seat. Please sit, Mr. Soren, said one of the independent directors, an older woman named Clara Finch. Her tone left no room for debate. We have a full agenda. He sank into a seat midway down the table, his confidence visibly leaking away. The meeting was called to order. The secretary read the formal notice. Then Clara Finch took over. The primary agenda item, she began, her voice crisp, is a vote on a resolution for the reassignment of the Chief Executive Officer role, pursuant to Section 8.2, the Aurora Clause, of our shareholder agreement. The majority shareholder, Sycamore Ventures, has submitted documented evidence of fiduciary negligence and material misrepresentation. The screen behind her lit up. It did not show explosive reveals or dramatic videos. It showed spreadsheets, graphs of declining membership, a side-by-side comparison, industry standard executive compensation versus Marcus's total draws. The categorized personal expenses, luxury auto leases, vacation properties labeled as corporate retreats, over $250,000 in club memberships and entertainment. Marcus shot to his feet. This is a witch hunt. These are legitimate business costs. You can't understand the pressure of building a brand in this space. Please sit, Mr. Soren, Clara said, not looking up from her notes. You'll have time for remarks. The evidence continued. It showed the quarterly reports he'd sent to Sycamore Ventures, filled with optimistic projections, juxtaposed with the internal financials my audit had uncovered. The divergence was staggering. He hadn't just failed to grow the business, he had systematically lied about its health to its primary investor. The floor is now open for discussion before the vote, Clara said. Marcus's face was pale, beaded with sweat. He looked at the other board members, seeking an ally, finding only impassive professionalism. He finally looked at me, his eyes wide with a dawning, horrifying understanding. "Sycamore," he whispered. Then louder. You're Sycamore. "The resolution is to terminate your role as CEO, effective immediately," I said, my first words directly to him in the meeting. "The board will appoint an interim manager from the Sycamore portfolio leadership. You will be offered a role as a junior partner, focused on local marketing, with a compensation package tied strictly to verifiable, net positive performance." "You can't do this," he roared, slamming his hand on the table. Ava flinched but kept writing in her notebook, transcribing the scene. "I built this. This is my company. My life." "You operated it," I corrected, my voice calm. "Sycamore Ventures built its survival structure 3 years ago. You have been a tenant. A tenant who, according to this audit, has failed to pay rent and damaged the property. The lease is up." Clara Finch called the vote. The 2 independent votes were aye. My vote, as the controlling interest of Sycamore Ventures, was aye. The corporate secretary recorded it. "The resolution passes," Clara announced. "Marcus Soren, you are hereby removed as Chief Executive Officer of Apex Vitality, effective 3:22 p.m. The silence was absolute. Marcus looked hollowed out, a puppet with its strings cut. The performance was over, and the audience had left. All that remained was the cold, hard scaffolding of reality, the ownership, the shares, the numbers that did not lie. He stared at me, not with anger now, but with a shattered disbelief. "The beach house, the cars, everything, will be reconciled against the debt you've accrued to the company," I said, gathering my things. "Kaito will oversee the transition of your corporate assets. You have until the end of the business day to clear your personal effects from this office. Your new manager will contact you tomorrow at 9 a.m. I stood. Ava stood with me, closing her notebook. We had seen the process through. The silent mechanism of control had engaged, meshed, and realigned the structure, just as the models in my office had predicted. We walked out of the boardroom, leaving Marcus sitting in the silence of his former kingdom. The revolution had been quiet, bloodless, and total. The ride back down in the private elevator was a journey between 2 worlds. The air, which had been tense with impending confrontation moments before, now held the still, quiet clarity of a settled matter. Ava was silent, clutching her notebook to her chest, her eyes wide as she processed the legal and emotional machinery she had just witnessed. In the lobby, the receptionist didn't just look up. He stood, a posture of involuntary deference. "The transition team is already securing his office and company devices," he said, his voice a low monotone. "The auto leases have been flagged for termination. The penthouse apartment manager has been notified the corporate guarantor is withdrawing." I nodded. "Send the final reconciliation report to my dashboard by end of day." "Understood." We drove away. The city, which had seemed so sharp and imposing on the way in, now looked different. The towers weren't monuments to untouchable individuals. They were simply containers for systems, and systems could be analyzed, acquired, and optimized. Marcus had mistaken the container for the power itself. "He looked empty," Ava said finally, her voice small in the post-adrenaline quiet. "He was," I said, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. "He invested everything in an image. When the reflection shattered, there was nothing substantial left behind. That's the real cost of building on arrogance. The collapse is total." I didn't drive home. I drove to the commercial district where my actual office was located, a modest but secure suite in a professional building, leased under a different corporate name. This was the engine room of Sycamore Ventures. Inside, the space was a hive of quiet activity. A few analysts worked at monitors, tracking markets. This was my team, small, expert, and discreet. They knew me as the principal, not as anyone's sister. Ava, this is where the real work happens, I said, leading her past the workstations to my private glass-walled office. I logged into the master dashboard. The screen updated in real time. The Apex Vitality icon now showed a new status. Under New Management, Restructuring Active. Alerts cascaded, leases being renegotiated, redundant staff positions flagged for review, a new, lean budget being imposed. What happens now? Ava asked, sitting in a chair beside me, watching the data flow. Now, the real building begins, I said. We strip away the vanity expenses, the marketing blitzes that don't convert, the overpriced real estate. We refocus on unit economics. What does it actually cost to serve one member, and how can we do it profitably? We rebuild based on sustainability, not spectacle. I pulled up another window, the Beach House property file. I highlighted the decade of transactions, mortgage payments, tax bills, repair invoices, all from my accounts. I attached the audio file of Marcus's threatening voicemail. With a few clicks, I filed a formal notice with the property management company and my lawyer, establishing an exclusive right of use for the next quarter and freezing his access until a formal financial reconciliation could occur. The law, when supported by ledgers and evidence, was a tool of surgical precision. My personal phone buzzed. A text, not from Marcus, but from our older sister, Celia. Asterisk, Marcus just called me, hysterical. He says you destroyed him in a board coup. What is happening? Asterisk. I showed the text to Ava. This is the second wave. The emotional fallout. When you change a system, the shock waves ripple out. What will you say? She asked. The truth. With data. I typed back a concise reply. Asterisk, the majority shareholder of his company removed him for misusing corporate funds and lying about performance. I am that shareholder. The financial audit and board minutes are available. His personal narrative is not. Asterisk. I hit send. The message was not an apology or an explanation. It was a statement of fact, an anchor in the coming storm of drama. I then pulled up a simple spreadsheet for Ava. On one side, I listed Marcus's assets, leased car, rented penthouse, a CEO title, social clout. On the other, I listed true assets, ownership equity, intellectual property, cash-flowing investments, skills. See this column? I pointed to his side. These are rentals. They can be taken away by the actual owner, or the bank, or the market. This column, I pointed to the other, is ownership. It can't be repossessed if it's truly yours. He spent a decade renting an image. I spent a decade buying underlying value. The sun began to set, casting long amber shadows across the data on my screens. The initial action was complete, but the work of reconstruction was just beginning. The silence in my office wasn't the silence of an ending, but of a foundation being cleared for a new build. Ava broke the quiet. Will he ever understand? Understanding requires humility, I said, shutting down the workstations. We've given him the opportunity to learn it. Whether he does is now his choice, not our responsibility. Our responsibility is to protect what we've built and to teach you the difference between renting a life and owning one. We left the office. The evening air was cool. The dramatic, brunch-time threat felt like it belonged to another lifetime. The victory wasn't in the confrontation, it was in the calm that followed, the authority to walk away from the wreckage of someone else's poor design and go home to a sanctuary built on solid ground. The lesson for Ava was not about winning a fight. It was about rendering the fight unnecessary by controlling the board, the rules, and the equity. Long before the first shot was ever fired, our rented house felt different that night. The walls didn't seem like a temporary arrangement anymore. They felt like the intentional boundaries of a sovereign state. I ordered Ava's favorite food, and we ate at the kitchen table, the conversation light, deliberately steering clear of the day's tectonic shifts. She needed to see that after the earthquake, normalcy not only returns but is rebuilt stronger. Later, as she got ready for bed, my laptop chimed. The final reconciliation report from Kaito had arrived. I opened it in the living room, the blue glow the only light. It was a forensic accounting of Marcus's separation from Apex Vitality. The company-owned luxury vehicle had been retrieved from the valet at his club. His electronic access to all corporate systems, servers, and financial platforms was permanently revoked. The automatic payments for his penthouse, phone, and club memberships had been cancelled. A formal offer letter for the junior partner role, with its $65,000 salary and strict performance clauses attached, had been sent to his personal email ledger. It itemized every dollar I had spent on the shared beach house over the past 10 years versus his contribution, which was zero. A final note stated that based on his voicemail threat, considered a hostile attempt to deny access to jointly owned property, my legal counsel had secured a temporary exclusive occupancy order. The lock codes had been changed. I archived the entire report. The transaction was complete. The liability had been isolated and contained. There was a soft padding of feet. Ava appeared, wrapped in her robe.
Couldn't sleep?
Just finishing up, I said, closing the laptop. She sat next to me on the sofa, pulling her knees up. I've been thinking about what you said. About renting versus owning.
And?
Uncle Marcus was renting a personality. One that needed that specific car and that office to exist. Without them, who is he? Her question cut to the core of it. Now he gets to find out, I said. And that discovery is the most valuable gift we could have given him, even if it feels like a punishment. Building a real self is harder work than leasing an image, but it's the only thing that lasts. The following days were a study in controlled fallout. Celia called again. Her tone shifted from accusatory to cautiously curious after reviewing the financial summaries I'd sent. A few mutual acquaintances sent vague, probing texts. I had a standard reply: Apex Vitality underwent a necessary governance restructuring. I'm focused on the future. It was neutral, factual, and closed the door on gossip. I took Ava to my office 2 more times that week. She watched as the new management team, a no-nonsense operator for my portfolio, presented a 90-day turnaround plan for Apex. It was brutal in its efficiency, closing 2 underperforming locations, renegotiating vendor contracts, launching a digital membership tier. There was no talk of vibes or disruption, only metrics, unit economics, and pathways to profitability. It was boring. It was real. It was building. One afternoon, an envelope arrived by courier. No return address. Inside was a single key, the physical key to our parents' beach house, and a post-it note with Marcus's messy scrawl: "You win." It wasn't an apology. It was a surrender. Acknowledgement. I placed the key in a small box on my desk. It wasn't a trophy. It was a relic from a concluded campaign. A week after the board meeting, my dashboard showed the first green shoots. Operating costs at Apex were down 18%. Member cancellations had stabilized. The new digital product had its first 100 sign-ups. The patient was off life support and taking its first unaided breaths. That evening, I sat with Ava as she worked on a school project about influential structures. She chose the lighthouse. Because it's strong and silent, she explained, sketching carefully. It doesn't have to move or shout. It just has to be solid and true, and it saves people by being exactly what it is. I felt a surge of a different kind of wealth, one no portfolio could ever reflect. She had internalized the lesson not as a tactic for revenge, but as a principle for life. The final email came on a Friday. It was from Marcus's new email address at Apex Vitality, marcus.soren@apexvitality.com, not the CEO title he'd once used. The subject line was, Weekly Marketing Report, Draft. The body was a concise, bulleted list of local partnership ideas, with cost estimates and projected member acquisition numbers. It was competent, unadorned work. He had shown up, not as a king, but as a junior partner. He was learning the actual cost of things. I replied with 2 words, proceed.
Good start. That was the true foundation.
Not his humiliation, but his tentative, clumsy first steps toward authenticity. I had not wanted to destroy my brother. I had wanted to destroy the illusion he was trapped in, so the man might finally be free to build something real, even if it was small. I looked around our home, at my daughter building her project, at the quiet screens showing healthy portfolios, at the simple key in a box. The loud, glittering world my brother adored continued to spin, chasing its next trend. But here, in our silence, we had laid a foundation of ownership, of assets, of truth, of our own identities. And that kind of foundation, once poured, settles forever.
You can build anything on it.
What you just witnessed wasn't a fantasy of revenge.
It was a blueprint.
A blueprint for shifting from a narrative of power to the architecture of actual control. My brother saw the world as a stage for performances. I learned to see it as a system of levers, equity, and quiet, compounding decisions. For years, I studied not just markets, but human psychology, why people chase symbols instead of assets, noise instead of leverage. I built a methodology around silent acquisition, not of companies, but of freedom. The freedom that comes when your influence isn't dependent on anyone's permission or perception. This is the core of what we explore here at Winds of Thought. We dismantle the loud, shaky narrative sold to us and reverse engineer the silent, solid foundations of real wealth, real influence, and real peace.
We move past motivation and into mechanics.
If this story resonated with you, if you're tired of renting your status, your security, or your self-worth from a world that can revoke it at any moment, then you're already one of us. You're thinking of the deed, not just the door.
Your next step is simple.
Subscribe to Winds of Thought. Hit the like button on this video. It tells the algorithm that more people are ready for substance over spectacle. Every subscription is a silent vote for a different kind of power.
In our community, we go deeper. We break down the frameworks, the legal structures, the financial literacy, the psychological shifts that allow you to become the silent majority shareholder in your own life.
We're not about flashy cars or empty titles. We're about the quiet confidence that comes from true ownership. Turn on notifications,
because the next video will show you the first 3 silent acquisitions anyone can make, starting with less than you think.
The revolution isn't televised. It's archived in ledgers, built in quiet rooms, and shared with those who are ready to listen more than they speak.
Join us. Build from the foundation up.